By the time the noon heat bled out of dry willow, the wind had a knife in it. It shaved dunes off the road and hissed through sage like a whisper that wanted to be cruel. The Calder Ranch sat where the earth stopped pretending to be generous, a low house of sunburnt boards, a half-leaning windmill, a corral webbed with wire that sang when the gusts got mean. In the yard, two sisters moved quick and quiet, the way women do when there is no one left to help and no permission to fail. Mara Calder, 25, wore her hair in a bandana because it had a way of catching sparks when she worked too close to the forge. She had a small, shovel-shaped scar on her wrist, a white brand, old as last winter's grief, where the C-bar iron had kissed her by accident the night she pulled a bawling calf from a firelight birth. Folks in town liked to say that scar proved something ugly about her. They didn't say it to her face. They said it in the churchyard, with hands folded. Lark, 3 years younger, had willow-thin wrists and shoulders dark where the sun had made claims. She'd turned their father's old cattle log into a ledger of survival, tally marks for feed, for fence posts, for the days since the last decent rain. The book was wrapped in canvas and tied with a blue ribbon, torn from a dress she'd once worn to a harvest dance before they stopped going to dances. Now the ribbon kept the pages from escaping on the wind, as if the past needed tying down lest it fly. On the corral rail, a brand iron lay cooling, the C-bar shoulder still faintly red, tracing a quiet ghost on the air. The sisters read their father's brand like scripture. It wasn't just cattle. It meant Calder. It meant this dirt that had taken the dead and demanded the living be stubborn. It meant the names their father had taught them to write in the dust with the toe of a boot, Mara-Lark, names that were theirs before gossip tried to steal them. By evening, the wind carried shouts. Half a mile off, a tail of dust showed riders coming, the town's committee men, Brody Pike with the slanted hat, Deacon Ames whose kindness curdled in the sun, and Sheriff Clegg, who wore the law like a shirt he never washed. They didn't bother to hide their approach. Men who believe themselves rightful never do. Mara felt Lark stiffen beside her. Ledger, Mara said, softly. Lark slid the canvas-wrapped book under the bottom shelf of the porch, behind a stack of harness. She tucked the blue ribbon in, then hesitated, took the ribbon back out, and tied it on her wrist instead. Small stubbornness. A flag at the wrist. Her mouth was set, but the tendons in her neck told the truth about her fear. Mara picked up the rope coiled by the well. Good rope, soft broke from years of use, smelling of sweat and rain once fallen. She laid it over her shoulder, not like a weapon but like a reminder that things could still be mended and led, if you knew how to be patient. The rope had pulled calves from mud and planks into place and their father's body from the river when the horse stumbled 2 springs back. It knew the weight of loss. It hung easy. The riders fanned at the gate, gravel snapping like teeth under hooves. Sheriff Clegg pulled his horse short and let the animal blow, showing its yellowed eyes like that proved a point. Evening, girls. He made the word girls sound like trespassers. Sheriff. Mara didn't step back. She had learned that stepping back drew men forward. Deacon Ames folded his hands over the saddle horn, as if his horse were the pulpit. We come on church business and town business, which is the same business when the Lord is clear. Your note's been posted in the square a fortnight. By rights, this property reverts to town use at month's end. Lark's fingers found the ribbon and twisted it once, slowly. Our father paid off the bank note in winter, she said. Mr. Derry stamped the receipt. Brody Pike spat near the post, not on it, small mercy. Mr. Derry left for Abilene with a woman ain't his wife. His books left with him. Funny thing about proof, missy. Hard to find when men run off. The sheriff tugged his gloves tight like he was fitting his hands to what came next. Truth is, the council figures this land better supports the town if it's plowed under and fenced proper. You girls got wits and working backs, but that don't make you owners. He nodded at the charred pile where a shed had burned last month when lightning took a notion. And you bring trouble. Folks say your brand burns more than cattle. Mara didn't look at her wrist. She did not hide her scar and did not display it. The scar had taught her the plainest thing the world knows: fire does its work whether or not you deserve it. Our brand burns because the iron is hot and we are careful, she said. And this land knows our names. It answers when we call. That's as close to a deed as heaven grants the poor. Deacon Ames shifted in his saddle. Names can be forfeit. You are unruly. Dance at odd hours. Keep to yourselves. Refused courtship that might have steadied you. He glanced at Lark's ribbon like it was an insult. A counsel can cut away what's harmful. Then cut away gossip first, Lark said, softer than anger, like prayer. It grows quickest. Brody laughed. Hear that, Clag? Philly thinks she's clever. Sheriff Clagg's jaw worked. Under his coat, a folded paper fat as threat. He held it up between two fingers. Eviction. You'll leave at month's end. Or we'll help you leave. And while we're at it, the council's revised the brand registry. That C-bar never belonged to women. We'll strike it. Can't have orphan brands walking around starting fires. We'll come with a smith and a paintman, scrub it from your sign, your gate, your ledgers. Maybe from your skin if you're that stubborn. Mara's rope slid off her shoulder and fell to her elbow with a quiet weight. She didn't flinch. She looked at the paper, then at the men, then past them, where the road ran out into a horizon scraped flat and mean, the place a body stared when she needed courage from nothing. She took a breath that hurt and tasted dust, iron, and the wild mint that grew under the porch where their father used to spit tobacco juice so the smell would sweeten it. We'll stay till the last day, Mara said. And the last name stays with us. Words, Brody said. You can't graze words. The sheriff tucked the paper away. We'll be back with witness. He turned his horse, and the others followed, the three of them a problem that had decided to come later with a bigger hammer. The dust rose, followed, settled, like any decision the powerful make about the poor. Lark let go of the ribbon. Her hands shook. She leaned against the porch post, a smile sadness thing trying to steady her mouth. If they take the C-bar, she whispered, they take Pa again. Mara nodded. Her voice, when it came, was low and careful, the way she spoke to foals with too much fear in their legs. Then we will carve it where their hammers can't reach. Where is that? In what loves us back? They both heard the horse at the same time, not the sheriff's. This one came from the West Trail, step slow like the rider had reasons to think before showing himself. A tall dun eased into the yard with a rider who sat like a man listening to the ground beneath his mount. He wore a battered hat with a sweat ring, a coat rubbed shiny at the elbows, a rifle slung not for show but because he trusted what it had already done. His beard was days old, his eyes older. He took in the yard, the sisters, the cooling brand iron, the way Lark's ribbon held stubborn on her wrist. He took in the dust the committee had left, still hanging like a bad sermon. Evening, he said, voice roughened by quiet. Name's Eli Reyes. Looking for work that won't ask me to lie. Mara watched the way his hand rested on the saddle horn, loose but ready. She watched the dun's ears flick toward Lark and relax. She watched the wind lift the hem of his coat and figure out there was no badge and no deacon's book hiding beneath it. Work we have, she said. Lies we don't. He swung down, not slow, not quick, just in a way that said he had learned to give the ground a moment to decide if it wanted him. The dun nosed Lark's shoulder and snorted. Lark's hand, still trembling, went gentle. The horse let out a breath that sounded like a worn-out prayer, the kind that still works. Eli's eyes rested a second on Mara's scar. Not unkind. Not pitying. Not blind. He tipped his hat, not to the scar, but to the fact of it. Saw 3 men leave your gate with a cloud like judgment, he said. Thought I'd check if the wind was lying. It wasn't, Mara said. Shame, he said, like the word was heavy and he knew how to carry heavy things. Men who talk loud about order usually mean ownership. Do you talk loud? Lark asked. Only when the wind won't listen. He tied off the dun and waited like a man who understood the difference between being wanted and being tolerated. The sun was a copper coin caught between 2 fingers of cloud. The brand iron's last heat faded. Mara looked at Lark, then at the ledger hidden under the porch, then at Eli, a stranger who had said the only true thing a stranger could say on a first meeting, that he did not intend to lie. She felt the rope's weight on her arm, the rope that had pulled the dead and the living toward what needed doing. Her throat felt tight, the way it does before a name is spoken aloud to bless or to bury. Mr. Reyes, she said. We are keeping our father's brand by the rules of work and blood. The town aims to cut our names from our gate and call it mercy. If you're looking for wages, they are small. If you're looking for clean, there's dust enough to wash that hope right off you. He glanced at the charred shed, the windmill, the sisters who did not take a step back from anything, not even grief. I'm looking to be useful, he said. And to put my back between decent folk and foolishness. That pays what it pays. Lark swallowed. You good with a hammer? She asked, too fast, because fear had a way of rushing speech. And a rope, he said, glancing at the coil on Mara's arm. And with keeping my mouth shut when it's the kindest thing. The wind shifted. The sage smelled a little like rain that hadn't made up its mind. Eli's horse nudged his shoulder, his hand found the animal's cheek without looking, like he'd practiced comfort until it was a reflex. Mara nodded once. Then you're hired, she said. Just mind, we keep our names here. Carved where hammers can't reach. Eli's eyes moved from Mara's scar to Lark's ribbon and then to the brand iron cooling on the rail. He didn't ask what they meant. He seemed the kind of man who understood that some meanings are given time, not words. Fair, he said. We'll figure the rest when the wind sleeps. The light thinned. Somewhere, a coyote asked a question it already knew the answer to. Lark fetched 3 tin cups. The well water tasted like the bottom of a winter dream, cold, metallic, forgiving. They drank standing in the yard, strangers triangulating the small country between what's been lost and what might be saved. No one reached for anyone. But the distance changed, a hair, like a fence post not yet set true finding the place it will stay. In the darkening, the rope on Mara's arm felt less like weight and more like promise, not of a noose, not of capture, but of tie, of leading something frightened toward safety. In her mind, the sea bar glowed steady and quiet. Names, she thought. You could write them in dust 1,000 times and a single cruel boot could erase them. Or you could carve them behind the ribs, where only love and its pain could read. She looked at Eli. He didn't move, didn't fill silence with words that cost nothing. For the first time in months, she felt the air settle on her skin like it meant to keep her there, not push her out of it. Tomorrow, Mara said, almost to herself, almost to the land, we start mending the north fence. Eli nodded. And I sharpen the iron. Lark's fingers found her ribbon, then let it go. And I make the ledger ready, she whispered, because writing is a way of telling the future what happened to it. Above them, the first star showed itself shyly, as if ashamed to look at people who had been looked at too hard. Morning came silver and thin, the kind of dawn where the world looked like it might break if you spoke too loud. Mara and Lark woke to the sound of Eli Reyes already moving, boots crunching in frost, the rasp of a file on iron. He hadn't asked for breakfast, hadn't asked for pay. He had simply started with the brand iron, drawing slow sparks, edge by edge, until it sang sharp again. Mara watched from the porch with her arms crossed, her braids stiff from sleep. She had spent months carrying everything herself, the fear, the ledger, the fences, and trust had become something you didn't spend unless you wanted to starve later. Yet something about the way Eli worked made her throat ache. He filed not like a man in a hurry to prove himself, but like a man who knew time was already hard enough without being wasted. Fence'll need bracing by the north gully, Eli said, not looking up. Mara narrowed her eyes. You walked it already. Horse did, he answered, and there was a crooked kind of smile hidden in his beard. Lark came out carrying bread on a tin plate, nervous at first, then steadier as Eli took it with a nod that said thank you without saying it. She sat on the porch step, ribbon still tied at her wrist like defiance too small for men to notice, too bright for her to give up. By mid-morning, they were 3 figures against a horizon of wire and dust. Mara held the post steady, Eli swung the hammer, Lark drove the staples. The sound of iron biting would rang out like church bells for the faithless. Every strike felt like saying, we are still here. Halfway down the line, Mara caught her breath, leaned on the post, and wiped her brow. You could have kept writing yesterday, she said. You saw trouble in our yard plain enough. Eli's hammer paused midair. He didn't set it down. Riding on don't always mean leaving trouble behind. Sometimes it just means you're letting it follow you into the next town. He drove the staple in clean, 1 strike. The wind picked up, carrying voices from the road. The sheriff's men again, this time with 2 more, one from the smithy, apron still stained, and a younger clerk with ink on his fingers. Witnesses. The Calders stopped working, but they didn't step away from the fence. Mara's rope coiled on her hip. Lark closed the ledger and pressed her ribboned wrist against its cover like she was swearing on it. Eli rested his hand on the fence line, not his gun, not his knife, the fence itself, as though it were alive and he meant to guard it. Sheriff Clagg raised the eviction paper again. His voice carried easy. "This here's your last warning. Town'll strike your brand, take your land. Come sundown tomorrow, what's yours is ours." Mara's lips twitched, not toward fear but toward something sharper. She lifted her wrist, scar pale in the light, and said loud enough for all to hear, "Then carve your law on my skin if you dare. This scar is called her work, and no ink or hammer of yours will take it." The smith shifted in his saddle, uneasy. The clerk swallowed. Even the sheriff blinked. For a breath, silence hung like a rope above them. Then Eli stepped forward, laid his palm gently over Mara's wrist, not hiding her scar, but showing it steadier. "Her name," Eli said, voice low but carrying, "is already carved deeper than your paper can reach." Lark drew in a quick breath, eyes bright. The sheriff scowled, muttered something about defiance, and turned his horse. The others followed, but slower, like the air had weighed heavier on their backs than they meant it to. When they were gone, the wind moved again. The wire hummed under it, a sound almost like song. Mara's hand trembled under Eli's, but she didn't pull away. And for the first time, Lark smiled without fear. That night, the sky bruised black with stars, and the wind had gone soft. The three of them sat by a low fire in the yard, the fence line stretching away behind them like a scar stitched into the land. Lark had her ledger open across her knees, pencil scratching steady as she marked the day's labor. Mara sat sharpening her father's old knife, the sound of stone against steel quiet, measured. Eli leaned back against a post with his hat tipped low, eyes on the flames. He didn't speak unless he needed to. That silence itself was a kind of promise. Lark closed the ledger, tied it shut, and laid it on the porch. "I keep writing, but sometimes I think no one will ever read it but me," she said softly. "They'll read it," Eli answered, lifting his gaze. "Maybe not the ones you want. Maybe not while you're alive. But someone will. Folks think fire and rope erase names. They don't. They just make them harder to see. Your book's heavier than their paper." Lark stared into the flames, her ribbon catching the light like a vein of color in ash. Mara looked at Eli long and hard, as though measuring him not by his words but by how he sat with them after they'd left his mouth. He didn't look away. "You talk like a man who's buried things," Mara said at last. Eli nodded once. "I have." He reached for a twig, fed it to the fire. "Men. Promises. Whole towns. War leaves you carrying more graves than you dig." The fire snapped, and for a moment his face was sharp with shadow. Mara's hand tightened on the knife. She wasn't afraid, not of him. But of how familiar that weight sounded. She knew about carrying graves without digging. "You could still ride on," Mara said. "Leave before this turns ugly. You owe us nothing." Eli shifted, slow, deliberate. His hand brushed the rope coiled near Mara's feet, lifting it as if testing its weight. "You said today you keep your names carved where hammers can't reach." His voice dropped. "That's work worth staying for." Lark's eyes glistened, catching starlight. Mara looked at the rope, then at Eli's hand on it, then at her scar. The fire warmed her face, but her skin still prickled as if from cold. For a long while, no one spoke. The wind whispered through the sage. The fire settled lower, glowing instead of burning. And in that hush, a vow was made, not in words, not in ceremony, but in the simple fact of three people sitting close to flame, not leaving, not lying, not bowing. By noon the next day, the heat bore down mean, the kind that made fence wire hum and sweat sting the eyes. Mara and Lark worked in the yard with sleeves rolled, rope and ledger close by. Eli fixed the corral gate, his hammer steady, his coat slung across a rail. They knew the riders would come again. You could feel it in the air, that hush before a storm where birds held their breath. Dust rose from the south road. This time there were 6 men, not 3. The sheriff in front, Deacon Ames and Brody Pike behind, 2 more with rifles across their saddles, and a blacksmith's apprentice hauling a bucket of whitewash. The sheriff dismounted slow, boots crunching gravel. He carried not only the eviction paper, but the town's branding iron, a fresh-made bar meant to blot out the Calder seat. Today, Clegg said, voice sharp as dry cedar, the council strikes your name. The sea bar is no longer yours. It'll be crossed, burned away, and painted over. You'll answer to nothing. Mara's jaw locked. Lark's hand trembled on her ribbon. Eli stepped forward, shoulders broad, hammer still in his grip. You'll not mark them like cattle, he said. The sheriff's mouth curled. Step aside, drifter. Ain't your fight. Eli's eyes were steady, darker than smoke. It is, once you came to carve names off women's skin. The blacksmith's apprentice moved toward the gate, whitewash sloshing. Lark suddenly darted forward, planting herself between him and the wood. She pressed her ribboned wrist flat against the brand carved into the gate, sea bar. You'll paint over me first, she said, voice shaking but clear. The men muttered, uneasy. Even the sheriff's horse snorted and pulled back on the bit. Mara lifted her scarred wrist high, rope coiled at her side. Cut us, burn us, paint us, you'll still find Calder in our bones. The yard went still, heat and fear thick as tar. The council had come for paper triumph, but the sisters gave them blood and defiance. And in that pause, Eli Reyes set his hammer down on the fence post with a thud that sounded like a vow. You'll leave this place, he told the sheriff, low and certain, or the dust will remember you as thieves. The sheriff stared long, calculating, but behind him his men shifted, the apprentice paling, Deacon Ames frowning at the sight of a girl's ribbon over the brand. The moment cracked, not in triumph, but in hesitation. Enough. Clegg spat, swung into the saddle. This ain't over. Next time, we don't bring paint. The riders wheeled off, dust swallowing them, leaving silence heavy in their wake. Lark sagged against the gate, breathing fast. Mara dropped the rope, her hands shaking. Eli stood close, not touching either, but near enough that his shadow mingled with theirs. In the yard, the brand on the gate still shone, unpainted, unbroken. 4 now. The moon rose swollen and yellow, and the prairie seemed to hold its breath. Mara couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch with the rope across her lap, scars showing pale in the lantern's glow. Lark lay curled inside with the ledger under her arm, ribbon tied loose now as if even in sleep she feared someone might take it. Eli leaned against the porch rail, rifle near, hat tipped forward but eyes awake. It came just past midnight, the sound of hooves moving wrong, too many, too fast, not the calm rhythm of men riding honest but the fevered gallop of cowards gathering courage in numbers. 6, maybe more. Their laughter carried, broken and sharp, like glass rolling in a tin. The first torch arced through the dark, landing in the haystack. Fire licked quick, hungry, casting the yard red. Mara sprang up, rope falling, eyes fierce. Eli already had the rifle to his shoulder, voice a low growl. Inside. Both of you. No, Mara said, steady. We stand together. The riders fanned out, shadows circling, faces wrapped with cloth. One shouted, no brand stands against the council. No cursed names. Another torch flew, clattering against the barn door. Lark ran barefoot into the yard, ribbon whipping bright in firelight. Stop, she cried, her voice raw. This land remembers us. The men only laughed. One dismounted, hauling the council's iron from his saddlebag, glowing dull red from the coals he'd carried in a pot. He raised it like a weapon. Eli's shot cracked the night. The iron clattered from the man's hand, sparks scattering. Horses screamed, stamping wild. The riders jerked back, suddenly uncertain. The rifle's echo rolled across the plain like thunder answering cruelty. Mara grabbed the fallen iron with her bare hands wrapped in rope, the fibers smoking. She heaved it into the dirt, stomping until its glow died. Her palms blistered, her scar burning fresh. Yet she stood taller for it, chest heaving, eyes unbroken. Eli chambered another round, voice steady. You come again, you'll not leave walking. The riders pulled back, their courage scattering like the sparks they'd thrown. Hooves pounded away, swallowed by the dark. Only the fire remained, clawing up the hay. Together, they fought it down. Mara with raw hands hauling water, Lark beating sparks with a blanket, Eli dragging the burning heap clear. By dawn, their yard was ash-streaked, smoke rising thin into the sky. But the gate still bore the C-bar, unpainted, unbroken. Mara's palms were ruined, flesh angry and swollen. Eli took her hands gently in his, wrapped them with strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. His touch was careful, reverent. Mara flinched but didn't pull away. "You'll scar again," he murmured. "Then let it scar," she whispered, voice cracked but fierce. "Better scarred than erased." Lark pressed the ledger to her chest, ribbon falling loose. In the weak light, her face was streaked with soot, but her eyes burned steady. "They tried to cut our names," she said, voice shaking but sure, "and instead they carved them deeper." The three of them stood in the smoke, ash in their hair, fire in their breath, not triumphant, but unbroken. By dawn the ash still clung to their clothes, their hair smelling of smoke. The yard looked like a battlefield, barn scarred black, haystack a heap of embers, the earth trampled hard. Yet the C-bar still marked the gate. Word had spread fast. By noon the whole town gathered at the square. Mara and Lark walked side by side, ribbon and scar showing plain, Eli trailing with his rifle across his back. Some folks looked at them with pity, some with hunger, most with the sharp edge of judgment sharpened on gossip. Sheriff Clagg unrolled the eviction paper before the church steps. "This land belongs now to the town. These women are trespassers, their names stricken from the registry. Let it be known." Mara stood tall though her bandaged hands trembled. She raised her wrist, scar glinting in the sun. "You may strike paper. You may burn barns. But you cannot cut names from flesh already seared by fire. You cannot scrub love from a rope that pulled our father from the river, or a ribbon tied against ledger pages. Calder still lives." Lark stepped forward, ribbon fluttering bright against her soot-stained skin. "If you take our land, you take our graves, you take our prayers, you take our bread. And you still will not have our names." The crowd murmured, uneasy. A child tugged free from her mother's hand, toddled to Lark, and touched the ribbon with a smile. "Mama," the child said. Her mother gasped, but the word had already split the air. The silence cracked wide. Eli moved then, slow but unyielding, stepping to Mara's side. He took her hand in front of all, her scarred palm resting against his rough one. He held it steady, like a man planting a flag not in soil but in flesh and vow. "She is not unwanted," Eli said, voice like gravel and thunder. "She is not cursed. She is Calder, and I stand with her. Strike her name, you strike mine." The crowd wavered. Deacon Ames shifted, frowning, uncertain. Brody Pike muttered but did not speak up. Even the sheriff's face twisted, caught between law and something older than law, the sight of a man refusing shame for a woman scorned. The ledger lay in Lark's arms, heavy with every mark of survival. The ribbon shone like a vein of sky in the dust. The scar gleamed like iron cooled but unbroken. Together they stood, three against a town, yet the weight of silence now bent toward them. Not victory. Not yet. But a crack in the wall. And cracks grow. The square emptied slow, folks slipping back to shops and porches with silence clinging to their boots. No one had dared cheer for the sisters. No one had dared spit either. The silence itself was a crack in the wall. Mara, Lark, and Eli walked home under a sky streaked red with dusk. The prairie wind carried ash, but also the faint smell of sage blooming after heat. It was not triumph. It was not safety. But it was still theirs. In the yard, the barn still bore its wounds. The gate still bore the C-bar, dark and stubborn. Mara's scar throbbed beneath its bandage. Lark untied her ribbon and smoothed it flat across the ledger before setting it gently on the porch rail. Eli stepped inside the burned barn and came out with something small in his fist. He opened his palm, a crooked circle of metal, blackened and warped. Thomas McGraw's wedding ring, half melted, found in the ash. Mara froze. Her breath caught, the way it does when memory and pain collide. "This," Eli said, voice quiet, "isn't a curse. It's proof you survived." Mara stared at the ring, at the way it twisted, ruined yet whole. Her throat tightened. Slowly, she took it. Her hands shook, but her grip was steady enough. "Then let it rest," she whispered. They dug a shallow place beneath the hearthstone of the cabin, not a grave, not a hiding, but a keeping. Mara set the ring inside. Lark laid her ribbon across it. Eli placed one nail, bent and spent from the fence line. Then they lowered the stone, sealing it with earth and silence. No paper could strike that registry. No council could cut that ledger. Beneath their home lay proof, scar, ribbon, iron, and ring, transformed from shame into vow. That night the fire burned low in the cabin. Lark slept with the ledger by her side. Mara sat near the hearth, watching the glow seep through the stone. Eli sat across from her, his eyes steady in the dim. Their hands did not reach. Not yet. But their shadows leaned together across the floor. Outside, the wind carried the coyote's cry, thin and lonely. Inside, the fire's warmth answered. And if any passerby had asked, later, what keeps a heart alive in the desert, the story would echo the way campfire tales do: a scar, a ribbon, a ring buried under stone, and one hand that never let go.